Well, as of yesterday, October 26th, most of us over here in Europe woke up to a very unfortunate announcement made not only by 2K, but also by Turtle Rock Studios. Now, the reason that I mentioned both 2K and also Turtle Rock Studios in this is that just before I get into the depth of the video, the first thing that I want to touch upon is the stark contrast in both of the statements made by the companies. To start off, we're going to take a quick look at the announcement made by 2K, as that is the company that decides whether or not the game is going to have a shelf life or not, as 2K is the company that owns the IP for Evolve. And as you can read here, according to 2K, the game is complete. But according to TRS and also the community manager of TRS, 2K ended their contract and they wanted to continue working on the project. Now, there's not really much that I can talk about in regards to that. It's very obvious that 2K are trying to get as much PR out of the way as soon as they can by saying that the game is complete, not long after they've recently introduced a microtransaction system for the game so that they can try and milk it for as much money as they possibly can. The game is evidently and blatantly, to anyone who's been playing the game even recently during the last week, nowhere near ready to come out of the beta program, and has been forced out of beta very early by 2K, trying to milk as much money out of the game as possible. But that isn't to say that TRS are completely innocent, and that's going to be a lot of what we're going to be covering today. Evolve, as most of you know, was released at the start of 2015 by Turtle Rock Studios, but was published by 2K. Now, Turtle Rock Studios are the same guys that made Left 4 Dead, the other game that was essentially abandoned in the past and left alone as well. So it comes as no surprise to a lot of people that Evolve is now also taking the same route. The original Evolve failed for a multitude of reasons. Most of those were built up by 2K and the awful pricing of the main game along with DLC assets. As said previously though, I went over a lot of this in my previous video, which was Does Evolve Stage 2 Deserve a Second Chance, where I kind of went over why the initial game flopped. If you want to see all about that, you are welcome to go and watch that video, but today's video is going to be mainly about why Stage 2 has flopped. Now, nobody but the developers can really give us a breakdown on why the game exactly failed. The best that we can do here is speculate, but we can also look at the game as gamers and say, why wasn't this appealing? Why wasn't it something that people wanted to pick up and play? And also, from somebody who was in the pro scene myself for the better part of 2 months, why was the appeal to play the game diminishing on and on for more and more people week after week? Now, some points that I touched on in the last video was probably the most important of those points was to stop rehashing old content. I urged to TRS that they really needed to try and get some new content out there to stop trying to rehash old characters, like for example turning Griffin into another character that you can now have, which is Electro Griffin, but trying to sell it off to the community or at least advertise it to the community as new content, when essentially it's using the same voice lines, it has a very similar skill set, it plays in a very similar manner, and it's not really anything entirely new for the hunters to come in and say, this is fun, or this is tangibly different to what I'm used to before. By rehashing old content, not only for the hunter side of the game, but also for the monster side of the game, you're making the game more unenjoyable, obviously, but that is due to the fact that there is very little excitement with actual new content. Now, what I described the rehashing as in the past was essentially cutting corners. The devs and the company are trying to quite smartly save money by not having to hire new voice actors, not have to put new mechanics into the game that already exist. They don't have to think of new characters, new names, new backdrops, new storyline, writing a new lore for the character on what new personality it might have as well. They can reuse the voice lines, they can reuse the character models, they can just put a little bit of gloss over it and sell it as a brand new character. It saves a lot of money and a lot of time in development, but in the end, it does leave the players wholly unsatisfied, especially if that is the only form of new content that the game is releasing time and time again. Even in the most recent patch that came out this week, we saw a new adaptation, which is being, the new name that's being sold now for quote unquote new content, they're adaptations. The most recent one that we've had added was Glacial Behemoth, which, as you may see on the screen, plays in an incredibly similar manner to Behemoth, looks incredibly similar to Behemoth except he's blue and icy. Nearly all of the skills have the same animations as before. And as a player of the game, especially one that has put in hundreds of hours and played in the competitive format, it leaves you feeling unsatisfied. When something is advertised to you as new or brand new, or at least something that is meant to feel different, and you go in getting the same or a very similar experience to what you have had before, then overall you feel like you've been missold. Granted, the content is free, so maybe sold is a wrong word to use, but still, I'm spending my time on this game, and there is an option for microtransactions to spend money as well. So people might actually spend money to unlock this character, their real life money, that feels and plays in a very similar way to the old monster that already exists. So to kind of bluntly go over that point, since Evolve Stage 2 went into its free format, they've essentially released absolutely no new content. They've re-released stuff that came out with the last game, like for example bringing out the new map, which is Dam. They've released the Dam map back into the game, which was a map that already released but was locked off to people since Stage 2 released. And this more or less can segue onto my next point, which was to make patches that can make people return to the game. A lot of the patches released by TRS felt like they were very rushed. Week after week, it almost seemed like as a patch was released, more and more people would get more and more pissed off and inevitably then leave the game. It seemed like the patches were driving people away from the game instead of actually doing what they were intended to do, which was to give people more hope for the future of the game and also bring in new people and bring back old players as well. Almost every week, it seemed like this was functioning in the opposite way. One of the other problems that was introduced with patches is that one team inside the TRS studio was evidently moving faster than the other. It felt that every single week, or at least every single month, when a rehashed character was released, or a new map format was released, or an old map like Dam was introduced back into the game, the team that was releasing new content was evidently moving quicker than the balance team. The mental image was almost as if coal was just being shoved into the fire without anyone actually being there to stoke the flames. We were left with a lot of rehashed characters, old maps that are still broken, monsters that haven't been fixed for months, left in front of us, whilst apparently quote-unquote new content is being shoved in our face over and over again without the old content or even the recently released content being properly balanced and actually playable at all levels of play. This essentially created a double effect, not only for the people who had actually stuck around to give the game a chance, because that's really what it was, but it also ruined the game for new people stepping in through the front door. People come in and they see all these massively cool characters, and they may even go as far to spend real life money to try and unlock them. Or optionally, they put lots and lots of hours into the game to earn enough keys to actually unlock those characters, only to be met with a disappointment that they are unviable, unplayable, broken, and almost considered to be troll picks by a lot of people in the current meta. This also gave the company no realistic expectation on when they could announce a date when the game would be coming out of beta. And as you can still see on the screen, the Evolve Stage 2 beta logo is still slapped in the bottom right hand corner, whilst 2K are advertising that the game is quote-unquote complete. One of the mistakes that a lot of companies seem to make, but was one mistake that was made time and time again by TRS and 2K, was the active killing of progression in their games. Following the last video where they had previously killed progression by introducing a 10 times experience and a 10 times key reward weekend, which just auto unlocks all the content for everyone, which leaves them with very little progression left to go forward, TRS decided to introduce a new economy for the game, making all the characters a higher price, but also increasing the amount of rewards that you get for doing certain things. Like, for example, accolades have now been introduced into the game, where you can do a certain amount of things like getting a 50-match win streak or completing your first multiplayer co-op match, which will give you bonus keys to unlock characters. Now, as a whole, this has made it harder to unlock characters. You have to put in more gameplay hours to get more rewards to unlock more hunters, which again aren't even balanced and don't fit into the current game format. Alongside this as well, previously we had touched on a ranked mode being removed from the game, which meant that even though you could have unlocked all your characters, there may have still been a ranked mode to kind of go back to and use all of your unlocks in a tangible and meaningful way. Well, needless to say, and no surprise really comes from this, the ranked mode was never reintroduced. So now Evolve is essentially left in a very Titanfall state where people have put their time into the game and got very good at it, but they have nowhere to show their ability or skill. Quite ironically, to go with this as well, a game that was trying to sell itself on competitiveness, that previously had massive balancing issues, a large roster of unusable characters and unusable monsters in respect to how many monsters were in the game, TRS also took absolutely no effort in organizing any tournaments, and as someone who played in the tournaments almost every single week, TRS gave almost no attention to the fact that the tournaments were going on, as all of these tournaments were being organized by the community. There was no retweets on their Twitter, there was no hosts from the main channel, there was no notation of it on their forums posted by any of the developers of the game. It almost seemed like the developers didn't care about their own game. Now, I'm sure a lot of people have read their last final letter to the Evolve community and how heartfelt it feels for them to have essentially their baby ripped away from them by 2K, but what it seems like to someone who actually played the game is that they didn't care about that baby of theirs, and it's been taken away by the people who said, hey, you haven't really looked after this, it's not in a healthy condition, we're gonna have to take it away from you and look after it ourselves. But even though we're not going to raise it, we might give it away to another company we don't know yet. The lack of a competitive scene in this game is absolutely devastating. Now, a lot of people play PvP games without the dream of them being competitive, but the point is that a lot of successful PvP games at least have a competitive scene. For example, Hearthstone may not have the best balancing in the world, but the devs have put in systems where there are competitive tournaments that happen almost all of the time that you can catch up on, and there is that dream of playing competitively. Now, even if you don't want to play the game competitively and you just want to play the game for fun, the game having an existing competitive scene shows a sign of the devs being involved with the game and caring about the community. It means that they're adhering content to people who want to enter tournaments, and it also means that tournaments are balanced enough to actually take place, which in the end says a lot for the state of the game. If the game is balanced enough for it to have tournaments where you can earn real life money and even play the game full time for a living, it shows that most of the time the game is also balanced to play at the front door, or at least at a higher level of play. Now, one of the things that really drove the stake for Evolve's heart was the constant back and forth teasing of a console edition of Evolve Stage 2. The devs kept going back and forth between, yes, we'll release a console version as long as the PC version goes successful, and at one point they actually released that a console version may be in the works. It was very heavily teased. But now, following the dropping of the TRS from 2K, it's now being said that obviously they're only going to be working on the PC version, which makes me question on if a console version was even in the works at all. This inevitably left a lot of people sick of Evolve's shit, but more importantly, it also meant that the game was being played on two fronts. There was a legacy version that since the summer of this year hasn't been balanced or hasn't been patched and hasn't been updated, and is also being charged real life money for, as far as to go that recently there were even sales on the game trying to sell as many copies of that as possible, bearing in mind that it's having no development and the player base is nearly completely dead for it. And to play the game, you almost have to play with other people, and there's no other people around to play it with. But it goes beyond me how TRS and 2K are expecting to give people any hope of the PC version of Evolve Stage 2 when the old, broken, abandoned version is still floating around on consoles for real-life money. Essentially, we don't know what's going to happen with the game. It's been taken from TRS now, and 2K are in charge of everything. They've said that they don't plan for any future updates with the game at all, but we don't know what could happen yet. They could pass the game off to another company to continue development. They could give it to the community to give them for future development as well, but we don't know what's going to happen. Now, Evolve could end up going on and getting people back in, even though they've announced that the developers are no longer present, that the game isn't going to be getting any future updates, and a lot of people will even see just by downloading the game for free today that it is a broken mess that really isn't very playable at the front door. There's a massive discrepancy in skill and matchmaking. There's no ranking system. The tournaments are almost all organized on Twitch and very hard to find, as the Twitch channel and the Twitch directory for the game is dying. And honestly, there really isn't much hope left for the game. Now, as somebody who was involved in the competitive scene and has a massive amount of love for this game, it is a real shame. Could they have done more to save it? I certainly think so, yes. They could have incentivized bigger streamers to come in and play the game and give it a bit more of a signal boost, but more importantly, they could have tried harder to keep their current streamers around and playing the game in the directory. For the 3.5 weeks, or even longer than that, the month and a half that I ended up playing the game for overall on Twitch, I was the biggest streamer in the directory 99% of the time, and there was very little done by the devs to incentivize me to stick around in that directory. But anyhow, that is all from me. I'm sorry if this video really hasn't brought too much to light. I'm just giving my overall opinion on why I felt the game failed, if I felt it could have done better, and where it could have gone really if the devs gave more of a shit, or even listened to their current community that was constantly screaming in their ears on what they wanted to be done. Regardless though, hopefully this will be my last video on Evolve, and we can move on to something new on this channel. A massive apology as well from me for the lack of uploads here over the last 2 months. It's been very hectic over here in Ireland. I've been struggling to find new things to talk about. It's been very busy with the Twitch channel as well. I've actually been organizing a roguelike marathon to be going forward too, and I don't even know what's going on with that anymore, but I do hope to give a lot more love to this YouTube channel here and get a few more, scheduled uploads, and hopefully a few more uploads coming in regularly, rather than them being so far spaced apart as they are now. Anyhow, thank you all so much to those of you who made it this far in the video, and I'll catch you next time.